So in this lesson, we're going to look at Ruby methods. Now, methods are a way to encapsulate and provide names for Ruby expressions so that we can recall them several times without having to rewrite the same code in multiple different places. We can just simply keep calling the method on some object and keep running that code that is within inside that method body. Now, we've looked at some methods already, some built-in ones, for example, on the string class, like our upcase, downcase, capitalized methods, and so forth. But now we're going to look at writing our own methods. So let's jump over into IRB and get a feel for writing our own methods. So let's look first at how to define a method. Now, we define a method with the def keyword, def, and then you put a space here, and then you write the name of your method that you're about to create. So for example, let's just name this method say underscore hello. Okay, then if you hit enter, we're on a new line here, and we're now inside the method body. So this is where we can write the Ruby code that we want to execute when we call this method on some object. Okay, so let's start simple here and just do a puts statement for hello world. Let's do a capital H there. Okay, and now, so this is all the code that we're going to put inside this method, and then we'll hit enter here, and then we need to end the method with the end keyword here. Okay, so that completes our method definition. If we hit enter here, we'll see that we get this symbol of say hello returned back to us, indicating that this method has now been defined and it's available for use. Now, in order to call this method, previously we've seen things where we've been calling methods on objects. So, for example, in our string example, if we say the upcase method, for example, if we use the string hello and we say dot upcase and hit enter, see we get that string back in all capital letters, but we're calling this method on this string object here. Now, something that we're going to touch on here real quick, and we'll dig into more in future lessons, is that we are always calling a method on some object. Now, puts is a method. It doesn't look like we're calling it on any object, but we are. Now, this string that we're passing to puts, hello world, this is its argument. You can very much use parentheses right here to denote the argument list. In fact, let's look at one right now. So if we say puts hello and we close our parenthesis here, we see that it works just the same as if we did not have the parentheses. Remember, in an earlier video I said parentheses are optional. We are going to tend to default to using parentheses in most cases. Puts, however, is one that I in print statements are ones that I typically tend to omit those parentheses on. But just know that you can put those parentheses there. Anyways, back to what I was saying about calling methods on objects. The puts method here, what we are doing is actually we're calling this method on an implicit object. And the implicit object right here, when we're calling these puts right here, is an object called main. And we can see that object if we type self into our IRB session, we get back that main object. And if we recall this puts right here with the parentheses, if I say self dot puts and hit enter, it runs just fine. So self there's an implicit self happening right here. That's why we can omit the self dot part when we normally go to call puts. It will be called on that object, or if we're inside a method and this method is not on a particular it's not a particular instance method of any certain class, it'll work its way up to where the puts method is defined, and we'll talk about method lookup in a future video, but it'll eventually find it in the lookup path. So it's a quick little detour about self and calling methods on objects. In some cases, there are implicit objects that these methods are being called on. But back to our example here. So we've defined this say hello method. Now, if we wanted to run the code inside the method body, we need to call this method. The way we do that is just by typing the name of the method, say hello, and hit enter. And then when we do that, we see that it runs our code, it prints out hello world, and returns nil. Nil is the default return value from the puts method. So that's how you define a method. Now let's look real quick at defining methods that take arguments. So the way we do that is let's rerun our or redefine our say hello method here. So we'll say def say hello, and now we want this method to take an argument, and then we want to use that argument inside of the method body here. So the way we do that is we open up a set of parentheses here, and then inside of here we give a name, an arbitrary name. You want probably to use a descriptive name here, but this can be anything that you want. We provide a name for the argument that we want to come into our method here. So let's just say, in this case, I'm going to say name, and then we'll close that parenthesis off, or close our argument list off with a closing parenthesis. Hit enter. We are now inside the method body. So now let's say puts, say puts hello, comma, name. I don't know why my terminal keeps doing that there. But hello name, we need to interpolate name so that we can use that value inside of our method. And then we'll end this off just like that. Now we see that we have this say hello method available again. And now what we're doing, so when we go to call this method, we need to provide it with an argument here so that we get the interpolation happening right here. So let's say hello, and then I'll just go ahead and pass my name in there. Say hello, Colin. And then when we hit enter on that, we see that it has taken the argument that was passed to our method when we called it, that comes in here, and we are interpolating it inside of this string and then printing that result out to the terminal. So say hello, Colin. So we can pass anything in right here, and it will get replaced or interpolated into our string. Now we see that we have hello, Chris. So maybe you can start to get a sense of how this could be useful, right? If you always want to say, if you're building an application, you always want to welcome the user that's signing in, you could write a default message and then just dynamically insert that person's name that's logging into your application. So you don't have to write a custom message each time or rewrite the same message each time a different person logs in. You can just recall this method and run this code and just interpolate the person's name that's logging into the application or program. So let's look at defining a method that takes multiple arguments. So let's make a method say def say or speak maybe. No, let's just do say. And we'll open up an argument list here, and then we'll let's say the first argument is going to be a greeting of some sort, and then the second argument will be a name. Now again, the names that you provide for the parameters here or arguments, they can be whatever you want, but it's good to have some descriptive names here, and you separate each one with a comma. Now let's hit enter on this, and we're inside the body of the method. Let's do a puts call, and we'll just interpolate these two values here. So greeting, we'll close that off and put a comma, a space, and then we'll interpolate name right here. Close our string off, and then end our method definition with the end keyword. Hit enter on that. We've now defined our say method. It's available for use. So we can say, and then we can pass in hello as the first argument here, and then we put a comma to separate it out to the next argument, and then I'll put my name right here, hello, Colin. And then if we close our argument list off here and we hit enter, we see that we get hello, Colin. Now we can also say, we can replace this first argument of hello with good morning, and if we hit enter on that, then we get good morning, Colin. Now let's look at something else we can do here. We can define default values for our arguments here, so that in the event that an argument is not passed to our method, it will not blow up. So for example, if we just type say and we hit enter on that, we see we get an error message that says wrong number of arguments, expected given 0, expected 2. And then this is the actual class of the error that is being raised by Ruby. So what happened is we tried to call our say method, but we didn't pass it the expected arguments. Whenever you define arguments like this, if you don't have any default values set, they are expected when you go to call the method. You have to pass them in, or you'll run into an argument error like this. So one way to get around this, of course, is to actually pass the expected amount of arguments to it. But another way is to define default values for either all the arguments or certain arguments, so that if you omit one, the default value will be used and it will not raise this error. So let's look at how to do that now. Let's look at our redefine our say method here. So let's say, we'll still do greeting, and then let's give it a default value of hello. So the way to do that is we write the name of the argument. We'll put a space. You don't have to put a space. You could put the equal sign right up against here. I tend to put the space and then the equal sign and then another space and then set the default. So in our case, let's set the default to hello. And then we'll put a comma to separate this argument from the next one, which will be our name argument again. And then we'll close our argument list off here. Hit enter. We are now in the method body again. And we'll do the same thing as we did before. We'll do puts, greeting, close that off, a comma, space, and then we'll interpolate name in here again. Close our string, and then make sure to end our method definition here. So now if we go to call our say method here and we only pass in one argument, say my name here, if I just do this and I hit enter, what's going to happen is that since there's a default provided for this first argument of greeting, the sole argument that comes in will be used in the place of this second argument here, and the default will be used here. So if we hit enter on this, we see that we get hello Colin. So again, Ruby is smart enough to know that if we only pass in one argument, then use the default provided here and use the one argument that was passed in as this second argument here, and then use that accordingly inside of our method body here. So, but now if we say our say method here again, and we say good morning again as our first argument, comma, and then we'll say my name again. And if we end our argument list here, if we hit enter here, then since we have provided two arguments, the default value that we set up here is overridden by this first argument. So it is used right here as we see. So good morning, Colin. So that's how you can provide default values for your arguments in your methods. Now let's look at another way to define arguments in Ruby with keyword arguments. Now, one potential shortcoming of defining the arguments this way is that they are order dependent. So, for example, if we call our say method again, and I pass Colin first, and then good morning after that, what we're going to see is not the output that we expected. We get Colin good morning right here. So you have to make sure to pass the arguments in the correct order, which can be somewhat problematic in certain cases. You know, if you don't know if you forget the order and you pass things in wrong, that could cause errors in your programs. So one feature of Ruby that allows us to mitigate this is something called keyword arguments. So let's look at those real quick. I'm going to exit IRB here just to clear all this out, and I'll hop back into it. And let's redefine our say method here. So we'll say def say, and then we'll open up an open parenthesis, or we'll open up our argument list with an open parenthesis, and then we will say, just like we did before, greeting. But the only difference here is that we're going to put a colon at the end of this. And then let's just not worry about default values right now. Let's just look at how we do the keyword arguments here with no defaults. So then what we can do is add a comma and then put our second keyword argument of name right here. So we say name and then a colon right there at the end. And then let's close our argument list off here and then do the same thing as before. We'll say puts, greeting, and then finish that interpolation syntax there, comma, space, and then we will interpolate name in here as well. Now, one thing to note, though you use the colons here to set them up as keyword arguments, when you go to use these variables inside the method body, you do not keep the colons there. You just refer to them just as the alphabetical characters of the variable name. So let's go ahead and end our string here, and we'll do an end. Okay. So now we've got our say method redefined. I'm gonna go up through our search history here again. Now let's start here. Let's see what happens if we try to call say like this. So here, if we could try to call the say method like this and pass in arguments how we've seen before, we see that Ruby throws an error. and it says that wrong number of arguments given to an expected 0. So that can read kind of confusing, but what's happening here, if we finish reading the rest of this bit of the message inside the parentheses here, we can see that it says required keywords, and it gives these 2 names of these arguments that we are defining that this method takes. So what this means is that when we go to call the say method, we need to use these keywords first and have them point to the values that we want them to refer to inside the method body. So for example, we would say, and then we would open our parenthesis and we would say greeting, colon, and then we would say good morning. Okay, and then we need to do the same thing for the name argument. We would say name, colon, and then pass the actual value that we want to use or have the name keyword argument refer to. So that in this case would be colon, and then we'll do a closing parenthesis right here. And now if we hit enter, now we see that it behaves just as it did previously. Now the fun thing about this is that now, since we have to do this way, this argument list that we pass to the say method here is no longer order dependent. We can pass these in any order that we want. So for example, if I just delete this bit here, if I delete this bit and then go to the beginning here and put name first, previously we saw that our message that was being outputted was backwards. But now that we're using keyword arguments, we can pass these in any order and we still get the same message how we would hope or expect to have it output to our terminal. So this is a really great feature of Ruby, these keyword arguments, because it removes that dependency on the order of the arguments that need to be passed to a method. Let's bring back our say method here, and we'll say greeting, and we'll just do how we did before, greeting and name. Now the way to set default values when you're using keyword arguments is to simply, like you would do in a hash, set a value, a key value pair, kind of the same thing here. So we would say greeting, colon, space, and then set the default just like this. Oops. So in this case, let's say hello, and then we won't provide a default for name. And then we can just go ahead and do our puts, and we'll say greeting, comma, space, and then we'll interpolate name, end our string, end our method definition, hit enter, and then we can say, and then if we just pass just the name argument, so just name colon like this and hit enter, we see that the default hello was used right here inside our when the output of this evaluator right here. If we pass in greeting, again, we don't have to be in any certain order anymore, so I can just do this at the end. Say greeting, good morning, and hit enter. Now we see we've overridden the default value that we set, and the value that we passed in is used. Now before we wrap up this introduction to methods in Ruby, let's talk about one more thing. Let's talk about return values from methods. Now say we have a method that whose body is like 3 or 4 lines long. Whatever the last expression to be evaluated is, whatever the result of that evaluation of that expression, that's what will be the return value from the method. So again, the last expression evaluated, the return value from that expression, that is what is returned from the methods. As we see here, when we call our say method like this, and we pass our arguments, we do see, printed to our terminal here the message, but what is returned is nil. And remember, we spoke at the beginning of the video about the return value from the puts method. It's nil. So puts is going to print out this code will be evaluated here. The string, all the proper values will be interpolated into the string. It will print it out, and then puts returns nil to us. So that is the return value from this method. So let's clear our IRB session here and hop into a new one, and let's look at some more examples of return values here. So let's just say def some method for now, right? And then let's say inside this method we do a bunch of things. We'll do like 2 plus 2. We won't print this code out. We'll just run this code. We'll print a string out, maybe hello, right? And then let's do 5 times 5 as the last expression. And then let's end this method, okay? So we've defined some method. That's the name we gave to this method. When we go to call this, what we're going to see is that what is returned from this method is going to be the result of evaluating this last line of code here. So 5 times 5 evaluates to 25. That 25, integer 25, is going to be the return value from this method. Even though all this other code is going to run, it will evaluate 2 plus 2. We're not going to see anything there because we didn't print out the result. We will see hello get printed out to our terminal. And then we will see 5 times 5. We won't see it executed, but we'll get 25 as our return value. So let's go ahead and call some method here. So we called some method, and we see that it printed out that hello, and then returned to us was 25. So what can be useful about this is that what we can do is we can say we can make a local variable. Let's say result equals some method. Okay, so what's going to happen here is that some method is going to be executed. This method is going to be called, and then the return value from this method is going to be assigned to this local variable result. So I'll hit enter on that. So we see that we get the hello printed, and then we get 25 returned. Now if we call result and hit enter, we see it's got 25 to it. So then we could use result in some other code if we wanted to. We could say result times 100. And we get 2500. So it's important to know about that methods return values by default. There's an implicit return that happens, and the implicit return is always going to be the last line of the method body that is evaluated. But there are ways that you can return different results from that. You can use the explicit return keyword to return a value, maybe based on a certain condition. Otherwise, it will return another value. So let's look at a quick example of that, and we'll also see a new way to write an if conditional here, which is called it's the modifier form. So let's make a new method here, and let's just say I don't know, def check input maybe, and let's have this take an argument, and let's just say it's a number, so we'll say num will be our argument name here. And then inside here, what we can do is we can say return 0, and then if num dot nil question mark. Okay, so we haven't seen this nil question mark method yet. It just checks to see if some object is nil. And we haven't talked about nil values really in Ruby. But I mentioned in a previous video that there's only 2 values in Ruby that are false or not truthy or falsy, and those are false and nil. So what we're going to do right here is we'll just return 0 if if this number or this num argument is nil. If this method returns true, then we're going to return 0. So, and writing if this way at the end is called modifier form. And what's cool and interesting about this is that you don't have to write the end keyword at the end here, whereas before when we were doing our if statements, we had to do like if num.nil, and then we would say like return 0 end like this. In the modifier form, we don't have to do that. So in most cases, if you're going to write a simple if statement like this with no else branch in it, typically you can use the modifier form and write as I showed you a moment ago and say, for example, return 0 if num dot nil like this. Okay. Oops. So that's the modifier form. You can write in unless the same way. So you just replace if with unless. Works the same. It's just the same modifier form. And then the other thing, so now if num is nil, then we'll return 0 from this. And then otherwise, we can just say num, and we'll just return, oh, I don't know why I hit that extra space there. We can just say num, and then we'll hit end to end off our method definition. So what's going to happen here is when we call check input, if we pass nil as an argument, for example, we should get 0 returned back to us. Otherwise, it should return whatever we pass in as the num argument here. So for example, let's check it out. Let's say check input, and then let's pass it 7, for example. We see that we get 7 back. Now if we do check input, check input, and we pass nil in here, we see that we get 0, because this is going to return true, because nil dot nil question mark is true. Nil is nil. So therefore we get this return value, and the way that that happens is by using this explicit return keyword here. It causes our expression to end early, or cause our method body to exit early or return early, and therefore returning 0 to us, because 0 is what we specified that we wanted returned if this condition was true. So this is where we're going to end our introduction to methods in Ruby. We will be seeing this a lot more as we progress through the remainder of the learning path, both in this Ruby section and also through the Rails portion of the learning path as well. So, as always, go practice in IRB, and I will see you in the next video.